Have you ever wished you could have a Bronx childhood reunion with your friends, your classmates, and your memories? Well, now you can. Back in the Bronx magazine is your ticket back to the borough of your youth. And for a limited time, you can get a free 6-month subscription that instantly transports you to the streets and stories that shaped you. Each issue brings you around a dozen true Bronx stories: shopping on Fordham Road, eating on Arthur Avenue, ice cream sundaes at Crumb's, the kitchen sink at Jan's, summer days at Orchard Beach, cheering in the old Yankee Stadium, even trips to Freedomland. It's 32 pages of laughter, nostalgia, and Bronx pride. A reunion in print that arrives every 3 months. You'll even receive a free picture of your Bronx building as it appeared in the 1940s, 50s, or 60s, and a free 1958 Jan's menu to stir those sweet memories. Now, this is a limited time offer, so call 1-800-727-6695 today and claim your free 6-month subscription, plus your Bronx building photo and 1958 Jan's menu. Because Back in the Bronx isn't just a magazine, it's the Bronx you remember, brought back to life one story at a time.
Remember Freedomland, the big amusement park in the Northeast Bronx, based on a theme of United States history and laid out on a map of the United States? Well, it lasted from 1960 to 64, and here's a long look back, beginning with a view of the entrance off Bartow Avenue, near where Co-op City was later built. In the distance behind the fence may be seen one of the steam trains, which we'll look at later on. You went inside the entrance and found yourself in the little old New York area, representing New York of the early 19th century. That Freedomland police station that you see here was actually the security office. It was one of the storefronts in the old New York area. Street scenes in old New York. There were several blocks of these, representing New York of the 19th century. Notice the awnings on the windows in the years before electric fans and air conditioning. They were a common sight in the real little old New York. Parades were commonly featured on little old New York's main street. Notice the streetcar tracks in the street. They were there for a real purpose too. This represents Macy's original store, probably on 14th Street. Perhaps not that authentic, but a close representation of typical New York buildings of the early 19th century and older. Here comes one of the horse cars on the 3.5-foot gauge track specially laid down for them. The horse cars ran from the little old New York area to the Chicago area and back. And the transportation was a remarkable bargain, too. For 10 cents you could ride from New York to Chicago. The horse car looped around one of the blocks, the block containing the Macy's store, and as it looped around you got a peek through the fence where the extra horse cars were stored in the storage lot outside the fenced area of the park. Up on the left may be seen one of the Freedomland steam-powered trains showing the open cars, as well as these horse cars which were stored in this area adjacent to the little old New York section. Normally not open to the public, but for the purpose of movie making we made an exception. The horse car has discharged its passengers from Chicago, picked up some New York passengers, and comes around the block again near that storage area, pulls around toward the front, and near the main entrance, and down the main street where the passing siding is. When you run several horse cars on a single track railway, there have to be provisions for passing. So the Chicago-bound horse car waits on the passing siding until the car arriving from Chicago pulls into New York and makes a typical pass similar to 19th century horse car operations. Here comes the car from Chicago. The turnout diverts it onto its track, and the two cars pass on the main street in little old New York, and the car coming towards us heads for Chicago. These horse cars made several stops along the way so that you could get on and off as you chose. This is at the Chicago Plaza, where it looped around a circular plaza in front of the Chicago train station. The Chicago area was also a representation of 19th century Chicago, focusing primarily on the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, but we'll see more of that later on. The horse car left the Chicago Plaza and heads under the railroad bridge and back to the little old New York area. And here it is back in the old New York area. Again, looping around the block with the Macy's store on it, and in the background may be seen the storage area we saw earlier. The gate and the fence happen to be open at this particular moment, and you can see one of the horse cars in the storage area, not at use at this particular day. Again, this horse car is crossing under the railroad bridge, heading from Chicago to New York. This car is coming under the railroad bridge from New York to the Chicago Depot Plaza. And so is this one. In the background may be seen the Chicago station of the steam train ride. This horse car is leaving Chicago, heading under the railroad bridge back toward the New York area. A slight bit of wilderness divided the New York area from the Chicago area on the other side of the railroad bridge, just so that the two cities wouldn't seem too close together. 558 DeKoven Street is where Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over the lantern that supposedly set off the Great Chicago Fire of October 1871. And here we have the hand-drawn fire engines ready to respond to the Chicago fire, which burst into flame every half hour or so, something of that sort. Here's Chicago in ruins from the Great Fire of 1871. Buildings all made of solid concrete and masonry, of course, so that the flames, which were fed by gas pipes buried underneath them, wouldn't actually destroy them each time the city burned up. Just why there was so much emphasis on the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 was not made clear, but I suppose the excitement of a burning city with firemen responding must have been a great family attraction in the early 1960s. Chicago also had a city street laid out here with various buildings. Many of these buildings held actual retail stores where souvenirs of Freedomland could be purchased. Some of them were regular retail items, some were special souvenirs such as Freedomland games and books, and other things were handmade crafts such as hand-blown glass and things of that sort. The steam train ride was a 2-foot gauge railway laid out in a large loop encompassing the western part of the map of the United States, from Chicago to San Francisco and back. These were real steam locomotives, Forney type, 044 types, real coal burners, which had been built many years earlier, in the early years of the 20th century, for 2-foot gauge industrial railways in Maine. And as they closed down in the late 1930s and 1940s, Ellis Atwood, a cranberry grower of South Carver, Massachusetts, rescued as many of them as he could and brought them to his plantation, which he named Edaville, EDA, from his initials. We'll see more of the steam train later on. Here are the Mississippi River boats, 2 of them, the American and the Canadian, built to resemble actual Western-style 19th century steamboats, although in this case they were not propelled by steam. They were propelled by Mercedes-Benz diesel engines in a compartment just ahead of the paddle wheel. The diesel engine drove the paddle wheel by means of a roller chain, and the paddle wheel actually did propel the vessel, although the pilot really didn't have to steer it, since it was guided by some sort of track or cableway buried in the water on the riverbed, which represented the Great Lakes. 2 trains operated on the 2-foot gauge railway pretty continuously all the time the park was open. Each train comprised a tank engine of the Forney type, seen here. Both were alike, although gussied up with phony diamond stacks and cowcatchers. There were 2 coaches and 3 open flat cars with benches and a caboose. Each train was slightly different from the other. On this train, the 2 coaches had regular railroad roofs with clear-story ventilators, and the flat cars had higher sides, and a caboose of a conventional type brought up the rear, where the kiddies could ride in a real caboose and climb up into the cupola. On the other train, the 2 coaches had arch roofs, and the flat cars had lower sides, and the caboose was made up to represent a drover's caboose, the type in which would be used on a cattle train, for example, where the men attending the shipment of cattle, the men were called drovers, would ride in the caboose along with the freight conductor. So we have various scenes here of the steam train on its large loop running from Chicago to San Francisco and back. In this particular silhouette, the train is leaving San Francisco and heading back toward Chicago. The trains ran in a counterclockwise direction at all times. You could actually board a train in Chicago and ride it to San Francisco and get off. You could also ride from San Francisco to Chicago, or you could ride in a continuous loop if you so chose. These waterways here represented the northwestern part of the United States, and the canoe rides and the tugboat ride were again guided by some attachment to a cable or trackway buried below the water level down at the riverbed. This little paddle wheel tugboat named the Totsie was, of course, guided by the trackway underneath the water, and again was powered by a diesel engine. The canoes were most likely towed along by the cableway under the water. Here's another view of that canoe ride. The passengers were encouraged to paddle along, but of course you notice how uncoordinated they are. The canoe was actually being towed along by some sort of cable work below water level. Now we take a ride on either the canoe or the tugboat through the northwestern part of the United States, and we see all sorts of 18th and 19th century scenes recreated here. Early settlements, Indian camps, totem poles, forts, and so forth, all represented by mannequins. Very few of the people and animals seen here were live. In most cases, they were mannequins of the type developed by the Walt Disney Association for Disneyland in the 1950s. Whatever motions they made were made mechanically, operated by remote control, and the buildings represent old-time Western settlements, abandoned ghost towns with skeletons of people and horses, including a hanging one there. This is what they did to horse thieves. The Civil War is well represented, with dead bodies littering the forts and camps and battlefields. Again, all mannequins, we hope. A Civil War encampment, a fort with guns firing real flames. And a mortar, Wilmer McLean's house at Appomattox, with General Lee surrendering to General Grant. Back at the San Francisco area, the San Francisco waterfront contained representations of Chinese ships which had come there during the gold rush era of the late 1840s, 1848 and 49. The 49ers, now seldom referred to, were a big attraction of the mid-19th century in the San Francisco and really built up the town.
Have you ever wished you could have a Bronx childhood reunion with your friends, your classmates, and your memories? Well, now you can. Back in the Bronx magazine is your ticket back to the borough of your youth. And for a limited time, you can get a free 6-month subscription that instantly transports you to the streets and stories that shaped you. Each issue brings you around a dozen true Bronx stories: shopping on Fordham Road, eating on Arthur Avenue, ice cream sundaes at Crumb's, the kitchen sink at Jan's, summer days at Orchard Beach, cheering in the old Yankee Stadium, even trips to Freedomland. It's 32 pages of laughter, nostalgia, and Bronx pride. A reunion in print that arrives every 3 months. You'll even receive a free picture of your Bronx building as it appeared in the 1940s, 50s, or 60s, and a free 1958 Jan's menu to stir those sweet memories. Now, this is a limited time offer, so call 1-800-727-6695 today and claim your free 6-month subscription, plus your Bronx building photo and 1958 Jan's menu. Because Back in the Bronx isn't just a magazine, it's the Bronx you remember, brought back to life one story at a time.
San Francisco train station, with one of the trains arriving. This is the one with the coaches having the arch roof. There was supposed to have been an entrance to Freedomland at the San Francisco end of the park, along with a large parking lot and a motel which would to be developed just outside the park grounds, but that never came about. The entrance was never built. Leaving San Francisco, the steam train, one of the steam trains, is seen heading through the southwest part of the U.S., where there were representations of Spanish missions, a crazy house with floors and walls tilted at various angles, and other attractions. This train is also leaving the San Francisco train station. Overhead may be seen the ore bucket ride, of which more later on. That was quite a novelty in this part of the United States in the early 1960s. That dummy station that you see there represented Tucson, Arizona territory. I say dummy station because the trains did not stop there. That was not a place you could get on or off. It was just a scenic effect. And behind it were the buildings that represented the Old Southwest. We are about to see a train passing by the station. This is the train with the cars having the railroad roofs. Two of the flat cars with low sides and one with high sides, and the conventional caboose in this case. As seen from the Chicago station, which was elevated on an embankment looking across the southwest, there is one of the trains coming around from San Francisco through the southwestern part of the map and pulling into the Chicago station. On the bridge over the horse car tracks, the train prepares to leave the Chicago station after boarding new passengers. The open flat cars were a delight to ride on a beautiful sunny day such as this. And there is the drover's caboose, built with a compartment for riders, as well as the cupola. This is the train with the arch roof coaches. This railroad was sponsored by the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, and the name Santa Fe painted on the cars betokened the sponsor of the line. You will also notice the Santa Fe's cross emblem on the locomotives and the car sides, as well as on the stations. These trains were operated by real locomotive engineers, firemen, and conductors who were members of the railway unions. They were not just amusement park operators. The locomotives were real steam locomotives burning real coal with real boilers and had to be operated by qualified personnel. Freedomland had an employment office that would hire people off the street if they found them qualified for various functions in the grounds, but the certain jobs had to be filled by qualified personnel from outside, and the Santa Fe Railroad supplied its own crews for the Freedomland steam train, which the Santa Fe Railroad sponsored. After Freedomland closed at the end of the 1964 season, the trains were returned to Eddyville in Massachusetts, where they continued to operate as part of the Eddyville loop, which had been expanded. Even though these were the smallest of the Eddyville locomotives, they continued to retain their Phony Diamond smokestacks and cowcatchers until the Eddyville operation was closed down in the around 1993. A train leaves San Francisco station heading through the southwest back toward Chicago. Passing the Tucson station again. This is a scene duplicated from a previous scene which we saw earlier, but the very nostalgia of all this bears repeating. Being of only 2-foot gauge, the cars obviously were not very wide. They couldn't be. The coaches had one seat on each side of the aisle instead of the usual double seats. The single seats were spacious enough, but the coaches seemed oddly narrower and toy-like inside because of that. They were not toys, though. These were real railroad rolling stock. The Chicago station again. It's easily distinguished by the bridge with the wooden walkway with the keg of water for fighting fires, as was typical of railway trestles for many years, especially if they were built of wood, although these trestles were built of steel girders. As the train leaves Chicago, it loops around the Great Lakes area and heads through the northwest. It passes near the tugboat and canoe rides and loops down into the San Francisco station. Seen from the canopy of one of the Freedomland restaurants, there is the steam train in the distance, and coming around through the southwest between San Francisco and Chicago, we see the full 6-car consist. 2 coaches, 3 flat cars, and the caboose. Notice the Santa Fe Railroad emblem on the caboose. And the lettering Santa Fe on the tank of the locomotive, as well as the emblems and lettering on the coaches. Once again, as seen from the Chicago station, the train heads out around the northwest, goes to San Francisco, and then comes back again. Here is the train at the San Francisco station, and here we have the pack mule ride. And these were not mannequins, by the way. These were real live mules with patrons of the park able to ride them on the mule trail through the Old West. The ore bucket ride was an import from Europe, most likely from Switzerland, where things like this had been used for ski lifts and other forms of intermountain transportation for many years. But in the early 1960s, things like this were still quite a novelty in this part of the United States. There were people who would not ride on these because of the fear of being up in the air about 50 or 60 feet off the ground in an open car. But if you were not afraid of heights or of being up there, it was a good way to see part of the park. The ore bucket ride was oriented in a general north-south direction and crossed over the 2-foot gauge railroad. If you're wondering what it cost to ride these things, you have to bear in mind that in different years there were different policies in the park. They started out by requiring an admission of $1, which you got at the change booth at the entrance to the park in the form of a silver dollar, which you then deposited in a turnstile. Then you went inside and you paid for each ride that you went on. In later years, the policy of paying for individual rides was abolished. An admission price of $3.95 was charged at the gate, and that got you most of the rides inside for free. Not the horse car line, though. That continued to be a 10-cent ride, and the train ride continued to be a 50-cent ride. But most of the other attractions were free. I seem to recall that the ore bucket ride was free in later years. The merry-go-round here, of course, was a major attraction, as it is in any amusement park. It seems no amusement park is complete without some sort of carousel. The many patrons enjoying it make this obvious. Over in the central part of the park, there were exhibits of commercial companies. There were, for example, the Borden Milk Company represented Elsie the cow. Braniff Airways sponsored the moving belt that took you across the water into the futuristic exhibit, the Spaceway. Space travel and futuristic exhibits were quite popular in the early 1960s because in 1957 the Soviet Union had launched the first successful artificial satellite, Sputnik, and that put everyone on notice right away that the future belonged to space travel. The American landing on the moon had not yet happened when this Freedomland closed. And here we see early American flags as we close our visit to Freedomland. The owners of the park found it expedient to sell the property to the United Housing Foundation for the construction of Co-op City after attendance fell off at Freedomland in 1964 due to competition from the New York World's Fair. Now we go to Connecticut for the Great Danbury Fair. This is October 11th, 1981, the next to the last day forever of the Danbury Fair. Here again, it was a seasonal operation. It operated for 2 or 3 weeks out of the year, near the end of September and early October. And yet the grounds had to be kept up, insurance and taxes had to be paid, security had to be maintained, and so forth, all year round. Just as was the problem with Freedomland and most amusement parks in the northern part of the United States. So the grounds were sold to the developer of a shopping center which exists there now where the Danbury Fairgrounds used to be. The Danbury Fair changed over the years. It was originally a country fair exhibiting livestock and agricultural products. Those continued to be exhibited, but in addition, there were transportation exhibits, rides, crafts, sales of arts and crafts and commercial products, vendors, and so forth. If you went by train to the Danbury station, a shuttle bus took you from the station to the fairgrounds. You paid your admission and went in, and on a sunny day like this, of course, it was always very crowded. Band concerts at the bandstand early in your walk around the park. Exhibits of 19th and early 20th century arts and crafts. Animal exhibits, of course, such as baby goats, which were always popular with the children. The general theme was New England of years ago, but of course there were modern exhibits as well. Tractor trains such as this Jeep-drawn tractor train took you around the grounds. All sorts of buildings dotted the fairgrounds with all kinds of exhibits. Colonial craftsmen in this case, iron workers, glass blowers. A huge grandstand near one side of the park had music concerts, acrobatic acts, stunt drivers of automobiles and so forth. We'll see more of that later on. Colonial exhibitions with employees in costume. A railroad boxcar used as a bandstand for country and western folk singers. Buildings representing along the Santa Fe Trail. Some of the representations of the theme were reminiscent of Freedomland, although they had been there much earlier with everything more crowded together. The New England Village here had been donated by the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad Company. It had originally been erected on the east balcony of Grand Central Terminal in New York City during the 1940s, and was transported to Freedomland after the war when the Kodak exhibit was set up on the east balcony. I'm sorry, it was transported to the Danbury Fair, not to Freedomland. This little boat ride was an attraction for children and adults as well. Again, it was the sort of thing that was guided by a cableway buried beneath the water, or buried just under the water on the riverbed. Transportation was a major theme at the Danbury Fair, although not the only theme. There were transportation exhibits, which we will see. This gasoline-powered Mack fire engine, for example, just across from an exhibit of sheep. Some of the buildings were actual solid buildings, some were just canopies or tents. Exhibits of costume through the years. Exhibits of old-time tools, such as farmers' tools of the 18th and 19th century, carpenters' tools of the old days. Wheelwrights and wagon makers' tools and crafts. One building held a museum of the Model T Ford automobile with a real Model T, looks like about 1918 or 19, perched on top of the building, exposed to the weather, and with other Model Ts of various vintages inside the building, along with an exhibit about Henry Ford and the machinery that made the Model Ts and other machinery that comprised the Model T's workings. The Museum of Transportation was yet another building. Some of the exhibits in here were a bit spurious. The Bloomingdale horse car, for example. I still don't know whether that was a genuine New York horse car body that Bloomingdale's department store bought and equipped with wooden wheels for operating on the ground. I know it was used in 1946 across 59th Street in the ceremonies converting the 59th Street crosstown streetcar line to buses. Then it came to the Danbury Fair, and the Bloomingdale's B letter remained on the dashboards. The Ansonia, Derby, and Birmingham electric locomotive of 1888 was exhibited here. The railway it operated on had become a subsidiary of the New Haven Railroad, and this locomotive, of course, was long out of service. How it got preserved is a different story. Here it is on display in the Transportation Building. In earlier years, as we shall see, the transportation exhibits used to be brought out of doors and were displayed out in the open air. At the sale of the possessions of the Danbury Fair after the fair closed in October 1981, the Ansonia, Derby, and Birmingham locomotive was bought by the Branford Electric Railway Association of East Haven, Connecticut, which operates what's now called the Shoreline Trolley Museum. And this locomotive was restored to operating condition by John Stevens, who deserves a great deal of credit for the proper restoration of this historically significant locomotive. It is supposed to have been the first American electric freight locomotive actually used in common carrier service. An old Boston and Providence stagecoach, which appeared real enough, and other 19th century vehicles were also displayed inside the Transportation Museum. Now this is a flashback to many years earlier, in the apparently the middle 1950s, when some of these artifacts were displayed outdoors during the time the fair was open. And there's the Ansonia, Derby, and Birmingham electric locomotive, as it appeared then, with its huge motor sitting inside the box cab, and it was arranged to drive the wheels by means of chains. Although it had long been inoperable, it wasn't restored to operating condition until the late 1980s or early 90s at the Branford Electric Railway Association grounds. There's the Bloomingdale horse car with a couple of dummy horses and a mannequin representing the driver. An open horse car operated around the grounds at one time, and apparently it was not on tracks. It must have been on regular wheels, because there's no sign of any tracks in these scenes, except when it was put back into the building, where it seems to have been on a track. Yes, there is a track there. Sure enough, this was operated on a track, and apparently that had been removed by the time of the last of the fairs in 1981. Yes, this did operate on a track. Whether or not it was a real artifact or a horse car made up to look like an old-timer is something I don't know, but there it is in the shed, and very obviously on a track, complete with a fare register. There's a little miniature train, a kiddie ride, which also did not seem to last down to the end of the Danbury Fair. A Union Pacific Railroad caboose, the Boston and Providence stagecoach, the Daniel Nason locomotive, a 4-4 type, and some old mining tramway cars. The Daniel Nason is the last American locomotive of the 4-4 wheel arrangement, with pistons and cylinders inside the frames, with the piston rods driving the forward driving axle by means of cranks on the axle. After the Danbury Fair closed, this was also auctioned off and was bought by the National Museum of Transportation near St. Louis, Missouri, where it may be seen now. It should have been kept in New England, in my opinion, and the representatives of the Smithsonian Institution, which wanted it badly as a historically significant artifact, bid on it, but were not authorized to bid up to the price it actually sold for. The Boston and Providence Railroad had become part of the New York, New Haven, and Hartford empire, but I understand that this locomotive had been retired and sold to some short line before the Boston and Providence became part of the New Haven system. So technically this was not ever a New Haven Railroad locomotive, but somehow came into the possession of the New Haven Railroad again many years later, and was either sold or presented to the owners of the Danbury Fair. Now it may be seen out in the Midwest. More animal exhibits, in this case a span of oxen. You can see by the crowd in the background that the livestock exhibits were always popular. Another building housed a display of antique automobiles. Presumably these were also sold at the auction after the 1981 closure of the fair. It was not easy to take movies in some of those buildings, which accounts for some of the short scenes that I've included here. Livestock also included poultry, and here we have fowls on exhibit. Factory and Home Show, Better Living Center, and so forth. These were the hucksters demonstrating commercial products which you were supposed to look at and then rush out to buy because you saw how well they worked and how much better they made your life, or so the pitchmen wanted you to think. That too was part of a country fair, selling one's wares. Some of the products would be commercially manufactured. Others would be made by individual craftsmen, woodworkers, glass blowers, metal workers, and so forth. By this time, the Danbury Fair had installed a sky ride, which was probably just an adaptation of a ski lift. Here's a dog cart heading around the grounds, and of course some of the newer amusements, such as the wild mouse here, were attractions in the later years of the Danbury Fair. In the background, a loop-the-loop in which the cars made a complete 360-degree circle with passengers actually upside down for a brief time. Ferris wheels are always popular at fairs and carnivals. Here's that super loop, so loop-the-loop again. Typical carnival attractions dotted the fairgrounds. The sky ride was a good way to look down upon the fairgrounds and get an overview. This edifice was the outside of the arena along one side of the fairgrounds, and various attractions and exhibitions were presented here from time to time throughout the day. In this case, we have acrobats performing before the grandstands. Circus attractions such as high wire acts and other acrobatics have always proven to be crowd pleasers. And the Danbury Fair quickly realized this. You've heard of the expression by the skin of your teeth? That acrobat is proving it. A motorcycle on the high wire, running on wheels without tires. Equestrian exhibits in the arena, and stunt driving performed by the Hell Drivers or some such group, using contemporary or recent dodges. Clown acts always are appreciated by the public. If this reminds you of the Cross Bronx Expressway at rush hour, the resemblance is coincidental. Driving automobiles on two wheels, especially if the two wheels are on the same side, always made the crowd breathless. The big top was under a translucent tent and was all crowded with commercial exhibits such as this vendor of unvented kerosene heaters and beekeepers selling their honey and agricultural products for sale, exhibitions of farm life and farm products, demonstrations of gadgets of all kinds, which you were supposed to rush out and buy. The management provided an area for lost children. Very thoughtful. Anyone want to buy a lost child? Colonial Hall contained exhibit of 18th century American clothing, customs, mannequins, and so forth. The state of Connecticut had an exhibit there too. One thing which characterized the fair was the preponderance of food stands of all kinds. Hamburgers, sausage stands, popcorn stands, pizza stands, all over the grounds. Uncle Joe's Sicilian Pizza, complete with the misspelling. This one was built into an old school bus. Cotton candy, candy apples, just about everything you could want, from full-course restaurants to fast food stands and candy stands. Walk-away sundae, ice cream stands, all arranged in just the right combination to settle your stomach. You would not go hungry at the Danbury Fair. Now it's time to return to the parking lot and board our bus or shuttle bus or car and head home after the next to the last day of the Danbury Fair. The next day, October 12th, 1981, would be the last day of all time. And so we bring an end to our views of Freedomland and the Danbury Fair.
Have you ever wished you could have a Bronx childhood reunion with your friends, your classmates, and your memories? Well, now you can. Back in the Bronx magazine is your ticket back to the borough of your youth. And for a limited time, you can get a free 6-month subscription that instantly transports you to the streets and stories that shaped you. Each issue brings you around a dozen true Bronx stories: shopping on Fordham Road, eating on Arthur Avenue, ice cream sundaes at Crumb's, the kitchen sink at Jan's, summer days at Orchard Beach, cheering in the old Yankee Stadium, even trips to Freedomland. It's 32 pages of laughter, nostalgia, and Bronx pride. A reunion in print that arrives every 3 months. You'll even receive a free picture of your Bronx building as it appeared in the 1940s, 50s, or 60s, and a free 1958 Jan's menu to stir those sweet memories. Now, this is a limited time offer, so call 1-800-727-6695 today and claim your free 6-month subscription, plus your Bronx building photo and 1958 Jan's menu. Because Back in the Bronx isn't just a magazine, it's the Bronx you remember, brought back to life one story at a time.